What a convoluted mess! Hey, I am Chuck the Bureaucrat, and the goal of today's video is to show you the current state of the Military Parental Leave Program. But this policy is currently in such a raw state that finding the right pieces of documentation, it's kind of like an Easter egg hunt. And I'm hoping that over the next 6 to 8 months, all of this should get cleaned up. So while I want to focus on your entitlements, I'm going to have to start by showing you the relevant references. You're going to need this because if you run into some old school officer or NCO, they might refer to old guidance and undercut your benefits. To get started, there are 2 important documents. DoD has DoDI 1327.6, that's for leave and liberty policies and procedures, and the Army has AR 600-8-10, leaves and passes. But right off the bat, there is a problem. The Army reg is dated July 2020, while the Department of Defense guidance was updated in 2023. So the Army is not exactly in sync with the Department of Defense. But it gets worse. The Department of Defense has issued 2 Directive-Type memorandums about maternal leave and parental leave. These are essentially directive memos that modify an existing DoD. In 2016, DoD made changes to maternity policy, and those changes were incorporated into the most recent version of the DoD. But DoD also issued a 2023 DTM for the expansion of the Military Parental Leave Program. And although it was published before the update to the DoD, it was not included in the updates to the DoD. And you can see how this would cause some confusion. Now, before I point out the Army's contribution to this chaos, I want to point out a tiny nuance between these 2 DTMs. Notice how 1602 is about maternity leave, but 2301 is about parental leave. One mistake I made while doing this research was looking for paternity leave policy. The term paternity doesn't seem to get used anywhere within these policies. They always use the phrase parental leave, even though these policies cover, among other things, the fathers of newborn children. Okay, back to the Army. Normally, when the Army wants to supersede an existing Army regulation, what they do is they publish something called an Army Directive. It's a signed document, and it directs specific changes in the next revision of the affected Army regulation. And the Army has a couple of these for AR 600-8-10, but that is not what they did with the Military Parental Leave Program. Instead, they published ALARAC 18-2023, about 2 months after the DTM. But an ALARAC, in and of itself, is not directive. It simply notifies commands about changes to policy. And what's more, the Army Publication Directorate has since archived that specific ALARAC. It's not available on the official site. And, at least in some forums, that has led people to believe that the associated policies have been rescinded. But in June of 2023, the Secretary of the Army signed a memo clarifying the guidance for both maternity convalescent leave and military paternal leave. And, just for the record, there is a MILPER message, 24097, but it deals with the process of requesting parental leave through IPSA, and it really doesn't have anything to do with your entitlements. All right, so what? Well, I'm going to give you the link to DTM 2301 and the Secretary of the Army's clarifying guidance. And I'm going to explain some of the highlights of the Secretary of the Army's memo without trying to talk about all the other documents that can confuse things. And let me just warn you again, this situation is evolving as all this policy gets written into the appropriate regulations. So this video, it's going to age. Hopefully, once a new AR 600-8-10 comes out, all of this will be very clear and you won't need to listen to me. First, there are two forms of non-chargeable leave associated with childbirth or adoption or foster care: maternity convalescent leave and parental leave. Maternity convalescent leave is intended to provide the birth parent time to recover from giving birth. The Secretary of the Army views 6 weeks as an appropriate amount of time for this convalescent leave, but a medical provider can authorize additional time to address a diagnosed medical condition, provided that they put the recommendation in writing and it gets approved by the commander. Now, when considering the length of convalescent leave, parental leave is not to be considered, and you'll see why in a second. See, maternity convalescent leave is supposed to be taken in one increment beginning on the first full day after the birth or the date of release from the hospital. Parental leave is intended to allow soldiers to care for the child. Birth parents, non-birth parents, adoptive parents, and even foster care parents, they all qualify for 12 weeks of parental leave to be taken in a 1-year period. Key point here: a service member who gives birth to a child qualifies for both maternity convalescent leave and parental leave. Now, parental leave can be taken in one chunk or in increments. And in fact, commanders are encouraged to approve requests for incremental periods of parental leave. In fact, the Secretary of the Army goes so far as to say that if the commander does not approve incremental parental leave, then they must approve a single 12-week block of parental leave. Oh, and only the first general officer in a service member's chain of command can disapprove a request for parental leave. So these increments, they have to be coordinated with the chain of command to balance the needs of the soldier against the needs of the unit. And these increments must be at least 7 days long for a maximum of 12 increments. Now, from here, there is just a ton of fiddly little rules. You can't transfer parental leave. If you don't use your parental leave before you ETS, then it's forfeit. You can extend the 1-year period under special circumstances. But HRC has plenty of guidance on all that. What I want to close with is a more practical point. You are probably going to run into people from, well, my generation, probably men, who didn't get parental leave when their kids were born back in 2005. And frankly, they don't see why you should be treated any differently now that your kids are being born in 2025. And as much as I would love to share it, I don't have any magic words to deal with these folks. But consider this. Since the early 2000s, the Army has become more senior, more professionalized, and a larger percentage of service members have dependents. That means that retention has become much more important to the Army than it used to be, and it's a lot easier to retain a soldier when their family members see the benefits of continued service. By the same token, service members who have families benefit from learning how to balance the needs of their family against the needs of the Army. I think that the push towards incremental parental leave can actually be a training opportunity both for commands and soldiers alike. And finally, it might not be a terrible idea to educate your non-military spouse about these policies and just let them discuss that at the Military Spouse Club. I'm a little bit suspicious that today's first sergeant or battalion commander's wife, well, she would have liked some help back in 2005, and as a result, she's going to have some opinions about this policy. And in the meantime, high school stabilization policy seems to continue to be trying to stabilize families during the junior and senior year of a family member's school. So watch this video to learn more about it.